Marshall Chriswell is on the line with us this morning, and it's time for another installment of Martial Law. This program intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law constantly changes. The information may not be complete or correct depending on the date and your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of that, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. And Marshall Chriswell is on the line with us. Marshall, good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you with us here today again. You know, during this pandemic, there have been all kinds of special measures taken from state government. Many of them have to do with legal rights and obligations. And one of those is actually something that will be expiring very soon, and that is the moratorium on evictions by landlords. Let's start by talking about that today. That's not so far from now that moratorium expires, correct?
That's right. So Governor Wolf, initially at the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic here, he issued a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. And then in May 7th, he extended that, and so it'll be expiring on July 10th. And there's been no indication at this point that it's going to be extended further. Of course, it could be, but as of now, that moratorium on evictions and foreclosures is set to expire July 10th.
And that's an interesting thing because we're talking two different things here. Evictions would have to do with those who are renting. Mortgages, people have invested life savings in those things.
That's right. That's right. And the moratorium on foreclosures, with that, there's federal law that also comes into play for a lot of those mortgages that are federally backed. Federally backed through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, first-time home buyers programs, also veterans programs, and those the Federal CARES Act actually has extended the foreclosure process even farther, and I believe that's through August 31st. So you've got federal and state law at play when you're talking about the foreclosures.
But those federal laws would only apply to people who are actually using some federal program, correct, like Fannie Mae?
Yeah, if it's a federally backed mortgage. Now, there are lots of mortgages out there, obviously, that are held by community banks and small banks that are in-house mortgages that aren't federally backed. So you really would need to know whether you fall within that category that's protected by the CARES Act.
Okay, so somebody who has been taking advantage of this program and has not kept up to date on mortgages or on their rent, what are the steps that they should be taking about now to protect themselves come July the 10th?
Right. So if you're a tenant and you have fallen behind in your rent payments, July 10th is the date that if you have been served with what we call a notice to quit or a notice to vacate by your landlord based on either non-payment of rent or based on your lease term having expired, if you've received a notice, that notice will become effective on July 10th. And you will have then normally there is a 10-day notice requirement for someone who has fallen behind in their rent payments. A landlord has to give a notice to quit and say, okay, you have 10 days to bring your account current or I'm going to file an eviction action with the local district court, the magisterial district judge. Mm-hmm. So if you are behind in rent payments, now is the time to get caught up. You've got to either make a payment arrangement with your landlord, and you would want to, of course, do that in writing, or get your rental account current. Because once that 10-day clock starts, then after the 10 days, they file for an eviction. You're going to end up at a hearing at a magisterial district judge, and if you haven't paid your rent, and you don't have a valid legal defense, there's a very good chance that a judgment for possession is going to be awarded to your landlord, and they can then begin the process of having you physically evicted from the rental unit.
And it's important for us to note as well that when this moratorium was placed, it wasn't a forgiveness of the debts that you owe for your rent. It was simply the eviction notice, correct?
Absolutely, and it also wasn't a moratorium on making rent payments. The obligation to make the monthly payment continued, but it was just that it was essentially a stay, a moratorium on the landlord being able to serve a valid 10-day notice and have a hearing before a magisterial district court and go through the formal process. So you're still required to make the payments.
All right. So you mentioned a moment ago that you might want to have something, you do want to have something in writing with your landlord and a payment plan of some sort. Is that where an attorney would come in and be very helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely want to have that written agreement, because if you go before a district court and the judge says, well, why haven't you paid your rent, or the landlord presents evidence that you've made some payments but not all payments, then you can say, well, Judge, I've got a written agreement here with my landlord that says that we're going to make smaller payments, or we're going to get caught up on this over time, and that of course would be a valid defense to an eviction.
Yeah. Other issues that one might run into when they're in this situation with an eviction, and we don't really have to limit it to this particular moratorium, but in any case, when somebody is facing eviction, what are some of the things that they need to do? What are some of the things that steps that they can take when they're dealing with something like that?
Right. Well, I think communication with your landlord is key. If you're falling behind in your rent payments and you are going to make a good faith effort to keep paying, getting caught up, communication with the landlord is key. Landlords, I represent both sides. I've represented lots of tenants. I've represented lots of landlords. And landlords, for very good reason, are in a lot of cases, skeptical of tenants and that they're going to make their payments. And also, there's a real need for a landlord, in the event they're not getting paid, to begin the eviction process quickly, because in Pennsylvania, it can take, when you talk about the notice requirement and the hearing and then the actual eviction, sometimes a landlord is looking at 3 or 4 months without rent, and that's not even counting what they have to do to get the unit ready to rent again. So landlords, of course, have a very clear desire to keep getting paid and to do things quickly to avoid the delay. So if you're a tenant that's in that position, making those good faith payments and communicating with your landlord, it's also going to look more favorable on you when you're at a hearing that you have done your best.
Probably good to remember as well that landlords have mortgages too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Most landlords, right, are some level of real estate investor that does that do have loans associated with their properties, and they can't go into foreclosure because the tenant can't pay the rent. That doesn't serve anybody's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So those are some of the things that people need to know about when this expires, when they're looking at other things that have to do with pandemic and special measures that have been taken by the state government. We note that in today's news, there is a form that the state now has put out where people can report businesses in violation of the state's various rules for business operations. Have you seen that form?
I haven't. That's actually the first time I'm hearing about that. Yeah, that's interesting. Is that a form that goes directly to the Department of Community and Economic Development, or directly to the state police, or how does that? Do you have any idea?
I'm calling it up right now, and here it is. And I'll tell you in a second. The health department actually is where it is through.
Okay. Okay.
So if businesses have, or people have a complaint about a business that's violating the restrictions, they can report it to the health department. It is an online form, and a very simple form. Just ask for the complainant's first and last name and their phone number, and then the business's information. And so, those are some of the things that the state has come up with, and obviously a lot of these are going to end up in court, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They are. As a business owner, and I think I've said on this program before, you want to be really careful here. The state really hasn't been aggressive with compliance with regard to the orders that have been issued. And I think there are business owners out there that say, well, I know I'm going to get a warning basically I know I'm going to get a warning that first time, so let's wait until the warning happens and then take some action. But you got to be careful. And another thing I've been telling my clients is that you've got to look at your insurance as well. If you're a business that has and every business should have some form of liability insurance, particularly if you have any sort of physical location, but particularly high-risk businesses with a higher risk for customers to get injured or things like that. Your insurance company, if somebody gets hurt, they may come back and say, wow, there's a provision in your insurance policy that says that you need to be in compliance with federal, state, and local laws for us to provide coverage. And I think this would be a great excuse for an insurer to deny a claim and leave you on the hook for a personal injury suit from a customer or a client. So I think that businesses, whether you agree with what these orders and the steps that the government has taken, I think as a business owner you've got to be real careful.
The complaint form has 6 sections. The first is your relationship to the business or facility, whether you work there or they happen to be in your community or no relationship at all. The second is the public health complaints, things such as the employees are coming to work sick, they're not social distancing, those sorts of things, or the business shouldn't even be open because of the closure orders. What type of business, and there you're talking auto dealerships, dental offices, food processors, cosmetology, all those things. Has the business owner been notified about the concerns? Has the local police been notified about the business? Other than law enforcement, have local officials been notified? Those are the things that you are asked to provide on this complaint form. And all of those, especially the type of business, not all of them, but many of them have state licensing requirements, and their license could be in jeopardy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've got to look at the big picture, and is it worth the risk of staying open if you may lose your business permanently? But I understand, obviously, there's the flip side of that, and you have small business owners that say, well, if I don't open back up, then I may lose my business permanently anyway. But this sounds like this form, is kind of a whistleblower form here. And certainly that can be shared across state agencies to the departments that deal with licensing, as well as to law enforcement.
Yeah, it's already been called the snitch form. So folks obviously will have some troubling waters to navigate through as business folks, or as we began our conversation, renters or landlords. So if they need the help of an attorney, what should they do to contact you?
You can stop by my office in the R&P Cole building on Church Street in Indiana. Call me at 724-465-5826, or go to the website www.westernpalawyer.com.
Marshall Chriswell, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thanks, Todd. Have a great week.
You too. We'll see you. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160.